Imagine this. You're walking to your car after work, and suddenly a janitor, someone most people overlook every day, screams at the top of his lungs, "Don't get in the car!" At first, everyone thinks he's lost his mind, until seconds later, the unthinkable happens. What that quiet single dad did next shocked the entire company and changed his life forever. "Don't get in the car!" The sudden scream echoed through the company parking lot, freezing everyone in their tracks. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Footsteps halted, and even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into silence. It wasn't a manager. It wasn't a security guard. It wasn't anyone with authority in the company. It was James, the quiet janitor most employees barely noticed. James was a single father, a hard-working man who had seen his fair share of struggles in life. Every night, long after the office is emptied, he cleaned the floors, emptied trash bins, and polished desks that others would occupy the next day. He worked with quiet dignity, never drawing attention to himself, never causing a scene. To most people in the company, he was simply part of the background. But in that one moment, his voice carried something no one could ignore: urgency, fear, and an authority that cut through the air like a blade. Dozens of heads turned toward him, eyes narrowing in confusion. Why would the janitor be shouting like that? Their questions were answered a second later when they followed his gaze. A sleek black car had rolled smoothly into the lot. Its engine purred softly, and the tinted windows concealed whoever sat inside. The car looked expensive, polished, and official enough that it didn't seem out of place. But to James, something about it was wrong. He had worked around this building long enough to notice which cars belonged and which didn't. This one had never been there before. Just a few feet away from the car stood a young woman, Anna Harrison, the CEO's daughter. She was bright, friendly, and well known around the office. Most employees admired her down-to-earth attitude, despite her father's immense wealth and power. That day, she had just finished visiting her father's office and was preparing to head home. She believed the car waiting for her was her ride, sent by her father's staff as usual. With her phone tucked in her purse, she reached for the handle, ready to step inside. At that very moment, James's instincts screamed louder than any rational thought. He saw the subtle tension in the way the car door cracked open, the way the driver's head dipped low as if avoiding the cameras, the way the engine revved just slightly as Anna got closer. Years of being a single parent had sharpened his awareness of danger. He knew when something wasn't right, and this wasn't right. His broom slipped from his hand, clattering noisily against the pavement. Without hesitation, James sprinted forward, his heart hammering against his chest. "Don't get in!" he yelled again, louder this time. Anna spun around in shock, her brows furrowed. "What? What are you talking about?" She didn't have time to process his words before the back door of the car flung open. A hand shot out from inside, reaching to grab her arm and pull her in. A chorus of gasps erupted from nearby employees who had been heading to their own cars. For a terrifying second, Anna's body leaned toward the stranger's grasp. But James was faster. He lunged forward, yanking Anna back with all his strength and shoving her safely behind him. His protective stance was unshakable, his eyes locked on the car, with a ferocity no one had ever seen in him before. The man inside, realizing the plan had failed, cursed under his breath and slammed the door shut. The driver hit the accelerator hard, the car screeching out of the lot and disappearing into traffic within seconds. The sound of screeching tires echoed in everyone's ears, leaving behind a stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved. The employees stared in disbelief, trying to process what had just happened. James stood firmly, breathing heavily, his arm still protectively stretched in front of Anna, who clutched his sleeve with trembling hands. "Dad," she whispered under her breath, pulling out her phone with shaky fingers to call her father. Within minutes, alarms were raised. The company's head of security came rushing out, followed by several staff members. They saw Anna pale and shaken, James standing guard beside her, and the skid marks left behind by the suspicious car. Security immediately began reviewing camera footage, while other employees surrounded Anna with concern. By the time Mr. Harrison, the CEO, arrived at the scene, word had already begun spreading inside the building. He rushed toward his daughter, embracing her tightly as she broke down in his arms. She explained what had happened between sobs, that a strange car had nearly pulled her inside, and that James had saved her. The CEO turned to James, his eyes wide with a mix of fear, relief, and gratitude. For a man known for his cold, commanding presence in the boardroom, his voice cracked as he said, "You saved my daughter." The weight of those words settled heavily in the air. That night, James went home exhausted, but his daughter, Mia, ran into his arms as soon as he walked through the door. She was only 10 years old, full of energy and love, and she never failed to remind him why he worked so hard. As he tucked her into bed, he thought about how easily things could have gone differently. He had protected another father's daughter the way he would want someone to protect his own. That thought alone filled him with peace. The next morning, however, James's life would change forever. When he arrived at work, instead of heading to the janitor's closet as usual, he was directed upstairs to the executive boardroom. Nervous and confused, he entered the grand space filled with polished wood tables and sharp suits. To his surprise, Mr. Harrison was waiting for him at the head of the table, along with the entire leadership team. As the room quieted, the CEO stood and placed a firm hand on James's shoulder. Yesterday, this man, someone many of us walk past every day without truly seeing, saved my daughter's life. He saw what none of us saw. He acted when others froze. He risked his own safety to protect her. He is not just a janitor, he is a hero. The executives clapped, some even standing, their expressions filled with respect. James, humbled and overwhelmed, tried to shake his head. "I just did what any parent would do," he murmured. But the CEO wasn't finished. "James, from this day forward, you will no longer work as a janitor. I'm offering you a new role in our security division, with full training and a salary worthy of your courage. And your daughter, her education will be fully funded by this company." Tears welled in James's eyes. The room erupted in applause, louder than anything he had ever heard directed at him. For years, he had been invisible, but now every single person in that room was looking at him with admiration. Later, when reporters caught wind of the story, James was asked what made him act so quickly. He smiled softly and said, "I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because I'm a father. If it had been my daughter in that parking lot, I'd pray someone would have done the same." From that day forward, James was no longer just the janitor. He was the man who saved the CEO's daughter, the father who trusted his instincts, and the reminder that heroes often come from the most unexpected places. And in the hallways of that company, people who once passed him by without a second glance now greeted him with respect, gratitude, and admiration for the man who shouted, "Don't get in the car," and changed everything. The CEO's daughter, Anna, froze mid-step, confused and embarrassed. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp but laced with uncertainty. Her hand lingered awkwardly near the car door handle, as though she couldn't quite decide whether to follow the janitor's urgent command or ignore him and climb inside. People nearby stared in confusion, some whispering, others watching silently, unsure whether this was some kind of misunderstanding or a bizarre outburst. James's chest heaved, sweat glistening at his temples, but his eyes never wavered. They were fixed sharply on the vehicle before them. He took a step forward, his arm outstretched like a barrier between Anna and the sleek black car. "Don't get in that car," he said firmly, his voice steady now, each word cutting through the thick air. "That's not your driver." A murmur rippled through the crowd of employees standing around the lot. Gasps broke the silence. Who was James, a janitor of all people, to raise his voice at the CEO's daughter? Most of them had seen him quietly mopping the floors late at night or collecting trash without complaint. He was always polite, almost invisible, never stepping out of line. And yet here he was, confronting the CEO's daughter in broad daylight. Anna blinked, torn between irritation and hesitation. She started to protest. "What are you talking about?" But before she could finish, the back door of the car suddenly creaked open. The sound sliced through the air, making everyone's breath catch. A hand shot out from inside, fast and forceful, lunging toward Anna's wrist. The driver's head was still hidden in shadows behind the tinted glass, but the intent was unmistakable. He wasn't offering help. He was trying to drag her inside. For the briefest moment, time seemed to slow. Anna gasped, stumbling backward in shock, but the hand was already dangerously close. Employees standing nearby froze in place, eyes wide, their bodies stiff with fear. No one moved. No one spoke, no one except James. His instincts screamed louder than any thought in his head. Without hesitation, he lunged forward. His large, calloused hands, rough from years of labor, closed tightly around Anna's arm and yanked her backward with all the force he had. She stumbled behind him, her heart pounding, nearly falling to the pavement. But James's grip steadied her. "Stay behind me," he barked, planting himself firmly between Anna and the car. The driver cursed under his breath, a muffled sound lost beneath the hum of the idling engine. Realizing his plan had failed, he jerked his hand back and slammed the door shut. A split second later, the tires squealed violently against the asphalt as the car shot forward, leaving thick black skid marks across the parking lot. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air as the vehicle swerved onto the main road and disappeared into the chaos of city traffic. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. It was as though the entire parking lot had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Employees stood frozen, mouths agape, eyes darting between James, Anna, and the fading outline of the black car that had almost swallowed her whole. The faint echo of screeching tires lingered in their ears, a haunting reminder of how close tragedy had come. Anna's knees wobbled beneath her, and she clung instinctively to James's sleeve, her breath shaky and uneven. Her face, once pale with confusion, now carried the unmistakable pallor of fear. She looked at the man who had just saved her, this janitor she barely knew, and realized that had he not been there, she might have vanished into that car without a trace. James's own breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. But his eyes remained sharp, scanning the lot as though expecting the car to return. He was on high alert, his body tense like a soldier ready for another attack. Finally, someone in the crowd whispered, "My God, he just stopped a kidnapping." The words seemed to unlock the paralysis that had gripped everyone. A flood of shocked chatter erupted. "Did you see that?" one employee gasped. "They tried to grab her," another stammered. "James, he pulled her away just in time." The murmurs grew louder, filled with awe and disbelief. Anna swallowed hard, still trembling. She tried to steady her voice, but it cracked anyway. If you hadn't..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Her throat tightened as the horrifying truth sank in. If James hadn't shouted, if he hadn't acted, she would have been gone. James finally turned his head to look at her, his expression softening. "You're safe now," he said quietly, but firmly. "That's what matters." The crowd's murmurs quieted as security guards rushed into the scene, their radios crackling with urgency. They looked at Anna, at James, and then at the skid marks leading out of the lot. One guard bent over, touching the pavement where the tires had burned into it, shaking his head grimly. "They meant business," he muttered. Within moments, the CEO himself arrived, his usually composed face etched with panic. He pushed through the employees until he saw his daughter, shaken but unharmed. Anna ran into his arms, burying her face against his chest, tears filling down her cheeks. "Dad, it wasn't my driver. They tried to take me," she cried. The CEO's arms tightened around her, his jaw clenching as he looked over her head at James. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the powerful man who commanded respect in boardrooms across the city was simply a father staring at the person who had saved his child's life. There were no words at first, only a look of profound gratitude, heavy with unspoken emotion. The CEO finally managed, in a voice low and unsteady, You saved my daughter." James shifted awkwardly, not used to being the center of attention. His chest still heaved from the adrenaline, and his hands shook slightly. I couldn't let her get in," he murmured, his voice quiet but resolute. "Something was wrong. I had to stop it." The CEO's gaze softened, but his grip on his daughter didn't loosen. The crowd of employees looked on, still processing the fact that the janitor they often overlooked had just prevented what could have been a devastating tragedy. The parking lot buzzed with a mixture of shock, fear, and relief. People replayed the moment in their minds, the shout, the outstretched hand, the screeching tires. They would talk about it for weeks, perhaps years, telling anyone who would listen how James, the man they barely noticed, had stepped forward when it mattered most. Anna finally pulled away from her father's embrace, her eyes red but her voice steady. She turned to James and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You saved my life." James gave her a small nod. He didn't smile, didn't bask in the praise. He simply looked relieved that she was safe, that the danger had passed, for now. Deep down, though, he knew what everyone else was slowly realizing too. Had he not been there, had he not trusted his instincts, the story would have ended very differently. That day in the parking lot, the quiet janitor who shouted, "Don't get in the car," became a hero. And everyone who witnessed it would never forget the silence that followed, the tire marks on the pavement, and the single fact that rang louder than anything else. James had just stopped a kidnapping. Moments later, the CEO himself, Mr. Harrison, came rushing out after hearing the commotion. His face was pale, his usually calm and controlled demeanor shattered as his eyes darted across the parking lot. When he saw his daughter, trembling but unharmed, relief washed over him so strongly that his knees nearly buckled. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. She clung to him, her voice shaky as she tried to explain what had happened. And then his gaze shifted. His eyes fell on James, the janitor, the man he had seen countless times, pushing a mop or carrying trash bags late at night, now standing protectively by Anna's side. The broom he had dropped earlier still lay on the ground behind him, forgotten in the chaos. James looked exhausted, his chest rising and falling heavily, but his eyes remained sharp and alert, scanning the lot to ensure the danger was truly gone. Security rushed to the scene, immediately pulling the camera footage from the parking lot. Everyone crowded around the monitors to watch. The grainy black and white images revealed everything. The suspicious black car with tinted windows circling the lot, the door opening at the exact moment Anna reached for the handle, the driver's arm lunging out, and James sprinting into frame just in time to drag her away. The vehicle's tires screeched as it sped out of view, leaving behind only smoke and skid marks. There was no mistaking it. This had been a kidnapping attempt. And without James, Anna would have been taken. Employees who had witnessed the event whispered nervously to one another, their eyes wide as the reality sank in. It wasn't just luck that saved Anna. It was James's quick thinking, his courage, and his willingness to act when everyone else had frozen in shock. The janitor they had overlooked, the man they passed in hallways without so much as a greeting, had been the one to protect the CEO's daughter. Mr. Harrison turned to James, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved her life," he said, his usual commanding tone replaced with gratitude and disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you." James shifted awkwardly, uncomfortable, under the weight of so many eyes. I couldn't let her get in. Something felt wrong," he murmured. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man who had trusted his instincts and risked everything in an instant. That night, news of the incident spread through the entire building. Employees gathered in small groups, replaying what they had seen or heard. Some admitted they had never even spoken to James before. Others confessed that they had barely noticed him until now. But one thing was certain. Everyone agreed that without him, the CEO's daughter would have been gone. The next morning, when employees arrived at work, they were greeted by an unusual announcement. An emergency company-wide meeting had been scheduled by the CEO himself. The air buzzed with curiosity and speculation. People whispered in elevators and hallways, wondering what could possibly be so urgent. Some suspected it had to do with the attempted kidnapping. Others guessed it was simply a stern warning about safety procedures. But when the employees filed into the large boardroom, their whispers turned into stunned silence. At the long, polished table where executives usually sat, James was there. Still in his simple janitorial uniform, he sat right beside Mr. Harrison, the most powerful man in the company. The contrast was striking. The CEO in his tailored suit, exuding authority, and James in his plain work clothes, looking both nervous and out of place, yet undeniably deserving of that seat. People exchanged wide-eyed glances. This was unheard of. A janitor sitting at the CEO's side during an executive meeting? It was something no one could have imagined. When the room finally settled, Mr. Harrison stood, placing a steady hand on James's shoulder. His expression was serious, his voice heavy with emotion as he addressed the employees. Yesterday, he began, something happened that could have changed my life forever. My daughter was nearly taken from me, right here, in our own parking lot. A ripple of gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. But she wasn't taken, he continued, his voice rising slightly. She wasn't taken because of this man, James, a man many of you may know only as the janitor. A man most of you may have walked past countless times without a second thought. Yesterday, when danger came, it wasn't a security guard or an executive or a manager who acted. It was James. He saw what none of us saw. He shouted when no one else did. He moved when everyone else froze. And because of him, my daughter is alive and safe today. The room fell silent. Some employees lowered their heads in shame, realizing how invisible they had made James feel all this time. Others stared at him in awe, seeing him for the first time not as a janitor but as a hero. Mr. Harrison's gaze swept across the room before returning to James. It is not enough to say thank you. Gratitude alone cannot repay what you've done. From this day forward, James will no longer be working as a janitor. He will be joining our security division, where his instincts, his courage, and his vigilance can be put to the use they deserve. He will receive full training, a proper salary, and the respect this company owes him. Gasps filled the air again, followed by a wave of applause that started softly but quickly grew until the entire room was clapping. Some people even stood on their feet, their applause echoing through the boardroom walls. James sat still, his eyes lowered, clearly overwhelmed by the attention. But the hint of tears shimmered in his eyes. And one more thing, Mr. Harrison added, his voice firm but warm. James is a single father. I know how much he sacrifices every day for his daughter. That sacrifice will not go unnoticed. From this day on, this company will cover the full cost of his daughter's education. Through school, through college, and beyond if she chooses. Consider it an investment in the family of the man who saved mine. At that, James finally raised his head, his lips parted in shock. His hands trembled slightly as he struggled to find the words. Sir, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Mr. Harrison replied gently. You've already said everything with your actions. The applause roared louder, filling every corner of the room. In that moment, James was no longer invisible. No longer the man people ignored as he mopped the floors. He was the man who had risked his life to protect another's. A man who proved that true worth isn't measured by titles, suits, or salaries, but by courage, heart, and the willingness to act when it matters most. And as employees left the meeting, one thing was clear. They would never again look at James the same way. In that meeting, Mr. Harrison introduced James to the entire executive team, not as just the janitor, but as the man who had saved his daughter's life. The words hung in the air with a weight that seemed to change the atmosphere of the room itself. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes locked on James, as though trying to reconcile the man they had passed countless times in the hallways, mop in hand, with the man who had stood between danger and the CEO's daughter. Mr. Harrison spoke slowly with a gravity none of them had ever heard from him before. This is James, he said, his hand resting firmly on the janitor's shoulder. Yesterday, when my daughter's life was in danger, when every second mattered, it was James who acted. He noticed something the rest of us didn't. He shouted when others stayed silent. He moved when others froze, and because of him, my daughter is safe today. A murmur rippled through the room, a mixture of shock, respect, and disbelief. The executives exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their expensive suits. Many of them realized, with a pang of guilt, that they had never once looked James in the eye or spoken to him beyond a quick nod. To them, he had always been invisible, part of the background of the building. Yet here he was, seated beside the CEO as an honored guest. When someone finally asked how James had known something was wrong, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant at first, but steady. I'm a single dad, he said, his rough hands clasped together on the table. My daughter is everything to me. I've taught myself to notice danger, to watch people closely. That car didn't belong here, and the driver was acting suspicious. I couldn't stay silent. If it had been my daughter walking up to that car, I would have wanted someone to do the same for her. The room went silent, the kind of silence that sinks into people's bones and makes them reflect on their own lives. Executives who had been ready to dismiss James's actions as luck now felt something deeper. They realized this wasn't luck at all. It was instinct, sharpened by love, responsibility, and years of vigilance. For years, James had been overlooked, treated as invisible in the building. He worked tirelessly, cleaning up after people who barely noticed him. He was the man they passed in the lobby, the one they saw polishing floors after hours, always present but never truly seen. But now, as they looked at him sitting there, they didn't see a janitor. They saw a father. They saw a protector. They saw a man who had acted with courage when others might have frozen in fear. Mr. Harrison's eyes glistened with emotion as he looked at James. His voice broke slightly as he said, "You saved the most important person in my life. You gave me back my daughter. I cannot put into words what that means to me as a father." He paused, drawing in a deep breath before continuing. "But I can tell you this. Gratitude alone is not enough. Words are not enough. From this day forward, you will not return to your janitorial duties." Gasps echoed around the room. Some executives leaned forward in disbelief. James himself looked stunned, his brow furrowed as though he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. "James, I'm offering you a position in our security division. You will receive full training, proper pay, and the respect you deserve. Your instincts saved a life, and I believe those instincts belong in a place where they can protect many more." James's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. His eyes glistened as he struggled to process what he was hearing. All his life, he had worked hard, taking on whatever jobs he could to provide for his daughter. Never once had he imagined himself in a position like this, sitting in a boardroom, being offered not just respect, but a new life. But Mr. Harrison wasn't finished. He turned back to the executives and spoke again. "There's more. James is a single father. Everything he does for his daughter. I want to honor that devotion. From this day forward, this company will fund his daughter's education in full. School, college, whatever she chooses. She will never have to worry about her future because her father gave my daughter hers." At that, the room erupted. Applause thundered through the boardroom, rising and swelling until it echoed off the walls. People who had barely noticed James before were now on their feet, clapping, some even with tears in their eyes. James sat frozen, his chest rising and falling, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to take it all in. He lowered his head, overcome by the emotion of it all. For years he had worked quietly in the shadows, unnoticed, unappreciated. And now, in this moment, the entire company was standing for him. He finally managed to whisper, his voice cracking, "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Mr. Harrison leaned closer, speaking softly so only James could hear. "You don't need to say anything. You already said everything yesterday, with your actions." James's thoughts drifted to his daughter at home. He pictured her smile, her laughter, the way she hugged him every night when he came home from work. He thought about the nights he'd stayed up worrying about how he'd afford her future, whether he was doing enough. And now, sitting in that boardroom, surrounded by applause, he realized that her future was secure, that his sacrifices had finally led to something greater than he had ever dreamed. As the applause died down, people began approaching him, executives, managers, employees from all levels of the company. They shook his hand, patted his shoulder, thanked him over and over again. Each gesture chipped away at the years of invisibility he had endured. For the first time, he felt truly seen. When James finally left the boardroom, the hallways seemed different. People smiled at him, greeted him by name. Some even stopped to tell him how much they admired what he had done. It was overwhelming, but it was also affirming. He was no longer just the janitor who passed silently in the background. He was the man who had saved the CEO's daughter, the man whose courage had changed everything, and deep down, James knew the truth. He hadn't acted for recognition or reward. He had acted because he was a father, because when he saw danger, he couldn't stay silent. And though his life had now changed forever, the reason he had done it remained the same: love. News of the event spread quickly through the company and beyond. rippling out like waves in a pond after a stone is thrown. At first, it was whispers in the hallways, hushed voices in the cafeteria, employees stopping each other by the elevators with wide eyes and lowered tones. Did you hear what James did? The janitor? The quiet one? Yeah, he saved the CEO's daughter. Soon, the whispers turned into conversations, the conversations into admiration, and admiration into respect. By the end of the week, there wasn't a single person in the building who hadn't heard the story, and almost everyone found themselves seeing James in a way they never had before. They didn't look at him with pity anymore, or with the indifference of people who pass by someone they think unimportant. They looked at him with genuine respect. They nodded when they saw him. They greeted him by name. Some even went out of their way to shake his hand. What had once been an invisible man in their midst was now the one everyone recognized, not just for what he had done, but for who he was: a father, a protector, and above all, someone who had chosen courage when it mattered most. It was a transformation that went deeper than just polite gestures. Employees began to reflect on themselves, realizing how often they underestimated others based on their job titles, their backgrounds, or even the clothes they wore. How often had they walked past someone without so much as a glance, assuming they knew that person's worth just by the role printed on their ID badge? How many times had they dismissed the janitor, the receptionist, the cafeteria staff, never realizing the stories, the sacrifices, and the strength that lived inside those people? James's actions forced them to face those questions, and many admitted to themselves silently that they were guilty of overlooking others. His courage became a mirror, showing them their own blind spots. And through it all, James remained humble. He never strutted through the halls demanding recognition, never let pride puff up his chest. He still greeted everyone with the same soft smile he always had. He still arrived early and left late, making sure his daughter was cared for, making sure his responsibilities, both at work and at home, were met. When reporters eventually caught wind of the story and began showing up at the building, microphones and cameras pointed toward him. James didn't bask in the attention. Instead, he lowered his gaze and spoke with honesty. "I didn't do it to be a hero," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "I did it because I know what it means to be a parent. If it was my daughter, I'd pray someone would do the same." Those words spread almost as quickly as the story itself, touching the hearts of parents everywhere who understood exactly what he meant. His statement was replayed on local news channels, shared across social media, and even picked up by national outlets that praised his humility. Comments poured in online from strangers who had never met him but felt inspired by his example. "That's a real man right there," one person wrote. "That's what love looks like," said another. Parents, in particular, flooded the company's inbox with messages of gratitude, some sharing their own stories of strangers stepping in to protect their children. Others simply thanking James for reminding the world of what truly matters. Meanwhile, inside the company, Mr. Harrison often reminded his staff of that day. He wasn't shy about bringing it up, even in meetings that had nothing to do with security or safety. "Never underestimate anyone," he would say, his tone firm, his gaze sweeping the room. "Sometimes the person you overlook is the one who can save your life." Those words became almost like a mantra for the company. They were repeated in conversations, written on posters, even quoted in speeches at corporate events. It wasn't just about James anymore. It was about a cultural shift, a lesson etched into the heart of the company itself. Employees began treating each other with more kindness, more openness, more humanity. People started seeing beyond job titles and roles, recognizing the dignity in every individual. James, though grateful for the recognition, never let the moment change who he was at his core. He still spent his evenings helping his daughter with homework, cooking her simple meals, and reminding her night after night how much he loved her. He often told her, "Everything I do is for you." When she learned that her education would be paid for by the company, tears filled her eyes. She threw her arms around her father's neck and whispered, "We don't have to worry anymore, Dad." That moment, in their small apartment, meant more to James than any applause in a boardroom ever could. Over time, his story continued to ripple outward. Parents told it to their children. Teachers used it as an example in classrooms. Motivational speakers referenced it in talks about courage and humility. Churches shared it in sermons, highlighting the power of love and vigilance. Even years later, people in the company would recall the day with awe. Remember when James saved Anna, they would say? And everyone in the conversation would nod, their respect for him renewed. What struck people most was that James never once sought any of it. He hadn't planned on being a hero, he hadn't trained for it. He didn't do it for reward, recognition, or fame. He did it because, in the critical moment, he made a choice to act, to protect, to love as fiercely for someone else's child as he would for his own. That choice, simple as it seemed, was what elevated him in the eyes of everyone around him. As for Anna, the CEO's daughter, she never forgot. She often visited James and his daughter, bringing small gifts, sharing meals, and building a friendship that transcended the lines of wealth and status. To her, James wasn't the janitor who saved her, he was family. She would often tell people, "He didn't just save my life, he taught me something I'll never forget, that real heroes don't wear capes. They wear humility." And so, the story of James, the single dad janitor who shouted, "Don't get in the car," became more than just an incident in a company parking lot. It became a powerful reminder of courage, humility, and the value of truly seeing people for who they are, not just the jobs they do. It lived on not only in the company's history, but in the hearts of everyone who heard it. It became the kind of story parents told their children before bed, the kind of story that inspired strangers across the world to be a little more vigilant, a little more compassionate, a little more willing to step forward when others might hesitate. Because in the end, James proved something timeless, that greatness is not about status or wealth or recognition. Greatness is found in love, in courage, in the choices we make when no one expects us to act. And sometimes, the person you've walked past 1,000 times without a second glance is the very person who will remind you of what true humanity looks like. And that is why James's story never faded. It remained alive, retold again and again, growing not as a tale of danger, but as a testament to the extraordinary power of ordinary people. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at Harrison Industries shifted in ways no one had expected. For years, people had operated in their own silos, executives eating separately from regular staff, managers walking past janitors without so much as a nod, interns hurrying by in fear of being overlooked or ignored. But James's act of courage broke down those invisible walls. Suddenly, people started greeting one another in the halls, not just as coworkers, but as human beings with stories and worth. One afternoon, the cafeteria buzzed with an energy no one could quite explain. Instead of executives rushing to their private dining areas, they sat down at the same tables as maintenance staff and interns. It wasn't forced, it was natural. People wanted to know the names of those they had overlooked for so long. They wanted to hear stories, to connect. James, of course, found himself at the center of much of this attention, though he never let it go to his head. He listened more than he spoke, smiled modestly when people thanked him, and always redirected the conversation toward the value of community. Mr. Harrison noticed the shift, too. In one leadership meeting, he addressed the executives with unusual candor. "We spend millions every year trying to improve company culture," he said. "But one man with courage did more to unite this company than any program we've ever launched. If we don't learn from this, then we've missed the point." From that moment, the company began implementing changes inspired by James's example. Employees at all levels were invited to mentorship programs where they could share not only professional skills, but life lessons. Job titles mattered less when it came to respect. Whether you were a security guard or a senior VP, people understood that everyone had something to contribute. The story even reached clients and business partners. Some had doubted Harrison Industries in the past, accusing it of being too rigid and hierarchical. But when they heard what happened and how the company honored James, they saw something different: a workplace where humanity came before hierarchy. Deals that had once been uncertain suddenly went through, partnerships strengthened, and the company's reputation soared. And yet for James, the biggest change wasn't about business or culture. It was about seeing how people treated his daughter. Once just the janitor's kid, she was now looked at with admiration and kindness. Teachers at her school praised her father openly. Friends' parents would stop to shake her hand when they dropped their children off. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt proud. The media storm eventually faded as it always does, but the story left a lasting mark on those who lived through it. For Anna, the CEO's daughter, life was never quite the same. The memory of that day haunted her at first. The sound of James's shout, the sight of the stranger's hand reaching for her, the screech of tires as the car sped away. She had nightmares for weeks, waking up in a cold sweat, her father rushing to comfort her. But James never let her face the fear alone. He visited often, not as an employee of her father's company, but as a friend, sometimes bringing his daughter along. Together, the two girls laughed, studied, and reminded each other that life was meant to be lived, not feared. Slowly, Anna's smile returned, her laughter grew louder, and the shadows of that day began to lift. Reporters who followed up months later were surprised to see how grounded James remained. By then, he had started his training in the company's security division, balancing the demands of his new role with his responsibilities as a father. When asked if he ever wished for the spotlight again, he chuckled softly and shook his head. The spotlight fades, but the lesson doesn't. What matters is living every day with vigilance, love, and humility. That's enough for me. Mr. Harrison, too, continued to use James's story as a guiding principle. At conferences, he would recount the moment James shouted, "Don't get in the car," and explain how it changed not only his daughter's life, but the entire company. Other CEOs listened, some with tears in their eyes, realizing that leadership wasn't about titles or corner offices. It was about valuing people, all people, no matter where they stood in the hierarchy. Years later, when people looked back at Harrison Industries' turning point, they didn't cite a merger, a new product, or a record profit. They cited James. They cited the single dad janitor who had been invisible until the moment he refused to stay silent. His act of courage didn't just save a life. It reminded an entire community, and eventually a wider world, of a truth too often forgotten. Greatness has nothing to do with status. Greatness is choosing to care when it would be easier to walk away. And so James's legacy lived on, not in headlines or awards, but in the way people treated each other differently because of him. A quiet janitor, a loving father, and a man who taught everyone that sometimes the loudest lesson comes from the humblest voice. Wow, what an inspiring story. James's courage reminds us that true heroes can come from the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.